I'm incredibly excited to be joined by two absolute superstar authors who have never before been in conversation together. And this is for International Women's Day. We have Malaika Tubbs, who is the author of The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation and Erased What American Patriarchy Has Hidden from Us. Thank you for being here, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
And Soraya Chemaly, activist and author of Rage Becomes Her, The Resilience Myth, and All We Want Is Everything. Thank you, Soraya, for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with both of you.
So, in this conversation, we're going to get into the question of why authoritarians fear and target women and democracy on International Women's Day, and explore how control of women's bodies links to control of land, borders, and resources. Women have always been at the forefront of resisting authoritarian regimes. This is really evident in both Anna and Soraya's books and talks, yet their contributions are routinely overlooked, even as male strongmen build personality cults. Hello, MAGA. And vertical loyalty replace truths with propaganda and delegitimize independent authorities. This hopeful conversation will connect everyday harassment and domestic repression to militarized foreign policy and fossil-fueled strongman politics. Authoritarian movements are rising globally, and a new unconstitutional war launched by the United States and Israel against Iran is rapidly changing our world order. When you hear the phrase authoritarians fear and target women and democracy, what does it mean to you, and where do you see that fear most clearly in your work right now? And Anna, do you want to begin?
Yeah, where to begin? There's so much to say about this, but I will talk a little bit about how it shows up in our nation because obviously it exists across the world, but I think we often in the United States don't consider ourselves as a part of this. We're very good as Americans at commenting on other places and how they're oppressing people, and we don't do that kind of introspection. And I grew up mostly abroad. Yes, I was born in the United States, but I spent a lot of my childhood abroad, and so I kind of came back to the States as a teenager and was able to see things, I think, outside of the fishbowl per se. And so in the US, the way our nation was built, it was founded by men who were the underdogs. Nobody was expecting them to win the Revolutionary War. They surprised themselves even, but they actually became very fearful in the immediacy of that win that other people were also going to have this revolutionary and rebellious spirit and that they needed to suppress that. Shays' Rebellion is one example of that. And so they write the Constitution with that fear and that insecurity in mind, that they need to retain power in their own hands. And so they say that men get to vote and men get to own land. They say that women in their lives, they write letters to them telling them that they're not to participate politically, that the only thing that women are capable of doing is reproducing the power of men through children. And they create in our nation this problematic and flawed and limited binary. But that is what becomes kind of the law of the land, is this notion that there's a gender binary, but that the only people recognized in it are men like the founding fathers and the women who are attached to them. And so we see this level of oppression already for the women who are attached to them. But then we also see that they're clearly not including people who are enslaved because the Constitution has clauses to protect the institution of slavery. They're clearly not including immigrants from that point forward, even though many of them were immigrants, obviously, all of them. And they're not including indigenous populations. And so that sets us up for a nation where power is in their hands. They only really recognize the women who can produce their power through kids. And they're keeping everybody else from accessing any human treatment in the United States where they'll be able to participate in this so-called democracy. And so that isn't democracy, right? By definition, democracy means that power is vested in the people of a nation, all of the people of that nation. And so we haven't experienced that in the United States. And so instead, our foundation is authoritarianism. It actually is American patriarchy, is what I call it, always tied not only to a gender binary, but to whiteness and to supposed elitism as they defined it. And so what we're seeing in our nation right now is just a reproduction of that original social order. And so the way I kind of summarize everything that happens in the US is that there's a group of people who have wanted to protect and maintain that original social order where not everybody has access to humane treatment. And then there's a group of people who have said, that's not enough for us. We need to push for more, and we need to actually get closer to a legitimate democracy. And so that includes women saying, and the women who were attached to them saying, we deserve the right to vote. That includes people of color saying, yeah, not only white women, we all deserve the right to participate in this country. And so that is why there's always such an attack on anything that goes against that original social order, because what we've seen is the of this tug of war between these two different groups. And of course, there's a spectrum on both of these different groups of people. It's not really a Republican Democratic divide by any means. It's actually across party lines. You've seen people who are trying to kind of shift the nation and those who want to really maintain what the founding fathers envisioned. And so any attack why authoritarians go after women, and really in particular for getting specific women of color, is because those who have not been included in the system as it was originally designed have always been able to see beyond it. They've always been able to see that this is entirely made up. So it removes the power, because when, for example, the last point that I'll make on this is that Black women, in particular in the United States, who were told, you are the one who will pass the status on to your children, because if you're enslaved, any way in which you come to have children, those children are also going to carry that same status. And we know there's obviously many horrific ways in which Black women were forced to have children in the United States. And even in their unions of love, it was told, you and your children are property. You are not human beings. And so when you are told that, you immediately can see this is not true. This is not divine. This is not the natural order. This is made up. And so I will live my life trying to create a nation that is worthy of me and that is worthy of my children. I am going to create a new system. I am going to live outside of this system. And so it gives us this kind of power and this recognition of how fragile that system is. And so anybody who has that awareness of how fragile it is, how insecure those creators and those maintainers are, they're going to be subject to punishment, to consequences, and they're going to be targeted.
Brilliant. Do you want to add on to that, Soraya?
Well, I mean, there's not much. I agree wholeheartedly with that. And there were three things that were striking to me. One was I also was born here and grew up out of the country and came back as an adolescent. And I think it gives you a different perspective, and you don't have the sense of American exceptionalism that so many people around you have. And it makes you, I think, just more clear-eyed about maybe what's happening, because you're also trying to figure out what's happening, right? You're just trying to figure out what the mechanisms are. The second thing about that is part of that exceptionalism, of course, is this ideal of the nation. Everything that Anna just said, rooted in the in the Enlightenment and in Enlightenment values. And this idea that we had the world's greatest democracy, which I 100% agree, has never functioned. It's always been aspirational. I was interviewed a few years ago for a program that was titled How to Fix Democracy. And that was the first question. I said, well, your premise is that it worked. And for most of us over history, it has not worked. And we need to sort of acknowledge that. So no, I agree wholeheartedly with that. And then the last thing I would say is the situation we're dealing with, the sort of macho fascist global movement, but the authoritarianism we're seeing here is the logical acme of this system. It is the purest example of the ways in which whiteness and maleness co-construct each other in the system to produce this really remarkable imbalance of power in every capacity. So I'm basically saying ditto with more words.
I love it.
This is
I
how
love
we're paired together. Our brains work the exact same way.
Yes.
Yeah. Anna, this again, building on what you've just said, in your book, Erased, you show how Black women and mothers are systematically written out of history and policy. And I wonder how that deliberate invisibility smooths the way for both domestic authoritarianism and this aggressive foreign policy we're seeing now.
Yeah. If you have anybody who's being very clear on this is not good enough, we are fighting for more. We are demanding more. There are better ways to do this. Let's think about some of our universal truths, like mothers and how we can connect to each other. Like any of that is saying, hey, let's focus more on community. Let's focus more on interconnectedness. Let's focus more on all of us participating in designing this versus power being relegated to just one group of people. You're going to constantly see attacks against that because in a lot of ways, Black women have been painted as the foil to this system, as the foil to American patriarchy. And so depending on which group you see yourself as a part of, you've either seen it as this kind of heroic foil, or you've seen them as the villains in the story. And so those who have seen Black women as the villains have painted us with all of these limiting tropes that are constantly aimed at dehumanizing us, constantly aimed at blaming us for anything that has happened to us, whether that's the Jezebel trope, right? That's saying Black women who have suffered any attack or survived any attack that has to do with sexual harassment or assault, they wanted it. This is what, Black women are supposed to accept, right? That they're the Jezebels. Or if we look at it with the mammy trope, that Black women want to serve white families, that this is their space in the world. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And they're happy to do it, right? The Aunt Jemima kind of image. If we're looking at the matriarch notion on the more insulting way, sometimes matriarch is used as a respectful term, but in the insulting way, it's saying they emasculate their men. That is why Black families can't survive. That's why Black families can't stay together. If we look at the welfare queen trope, it's Black women, right? Even though welfare is going largely to white women and white families, it's putting this face of the Black woman who just wants to leech off the government and take money from them. So you're always going to see this reproduced over and over and over again. And it's largely because Black women have been the ones who have steered the most change in throughout American history because they just could not accept the idea that they were less than human, and especially that our children, whether they are our biological children, our community children, our nieces or nephews, that our children were not the most precious human beings and that they didn't deserve the same rights in this nation. And so when you don't have the privilege of kind of pessimism or the privilege to say, well, I can accept some of these things and instead I can't accept any of this, you're going to be one of the people who will change the face of a nation, who will say policies need to shift in accordance to my worldview. You're going to be attacked. And you're aware that it's worth the risk. You're aware that it's worth fighting for and maybe dying for, rather than living, accepting something that dehumanizes you every single day of your life.
Unequal relationships at home are kind of authoritarianism in miniature.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how you see those intimate dynamics preparing societies to accept strongman politics, militarism, and even these wars for resources that are happening right now.
Absolutely. I think there are a couple of things in the chain of thought that I just listening to us, I've been thinking. One is, I don't think we can really talk about this in the United States, obviously, without centering capitalism, right? Because 1647-ish law that broke with English tradition, which was patrilineal, and said, oh, inheritance of status will go through mothers, that did several things all at once. What it immediately did was make sexual violence and violation a financial instrument. And it also turned the children of Black women into an economic asset. So there's that level of dehumanization centuries ago, before the revolution, in the culture, in the nation, in the bloodstream of the economy. And even now, if you think about, for example, what's happening with Epstein, you see the same thing. You see the same thing happening over and over and over again in various, it's tessellated in all kinds of ways. But I think the through line there, though, is that clearly certain men in the society, particularly elite propertied white men, can use other people in any way that allows them to achieve their goals and status and power. So that kind of parks there. The second thing, though, is that in order for any of this to work, you need other men to go along with it. You need conformity. And the thing about patriarchy and misogyny, and the thing I'm really focused on right now is a male supremacy in the society, is that demands obedience from men. And virtually just by being, women are disobedient the minute they protest or say no or live their lives the way they want to. They don't have to be protesters. They just have to refuse those terms, which Black women have to do from the minute they're born just by virtue of being Black, right, in the society. White women, it takes longer. It takes decades sometimes. It takes the, complete attack on the reproductive rights to come to a sense of awakening about it. But anybody who doesn't fit the narrow classes in the hierarchy that keeps the system going, anybody who refuses that is going to be targeted. And in particular, right now, we see that on assaults of trans people in particular, because they defy this binary. But the binary is what these governments, ours and others, are insisting on, because without the gender binary, you actually cannot maintain the other ones. You cannot maintain white supremacy if you don't control women's reproduction. If women willy-nilly have sex and love whoever they want, then the whole system is screwed. And so I think that's why persistently, whether you're in Poland or Chile or Mexico or Ireland or, Afghanistan or the United States, that is a core foundational control mechanism. And it doesn't matter if you do it through violence or the law or theocratic culture, the goal is the same, And so you have automatically implicated intimate inequality in the structure from the start. And if you can't maintain it within that domestic sphere, all bets are off. And so that's why the right in the US is so fixated on the family, on feminism as a betrayal of the family, on single women as a betrayal of the family, on Black women radicalizing young white women in betrayal of the family. And it's just the same song over and over again.
And by the way, it just keeps striking me that both of you are happily married with 3 children each.
To men, we're happily married to. Are you married to a man?
Yeah. But it reminds me of something that I saw recently that was like women who like hate men the
I
most
saw that too.
are in the happiest of
They're
marriages.
the happiest ones because the guy has to be a solid guy.
Yes.
Exactly. I love that.
Yes.
And I say that even in Erase that, yes, traditionally in terms of like what's expected of women, like I married my college sweetheart.
Me too.
And we have our 3 kids. I'm
Right.
like, yes, those, and we're not saying that you have to reject those things in order to be active, in order to be feminist, in order to believe that people should have access to other choices, in order for us to recognize the humanities of others who do not necessarily fit into these categories. Like we're a perfect example of who people should listen to because we don't all have to, but we also are responsible for making sure that everybody is treated as a human being in this nation. And so we're like, great, we'll come up against any of those crazy patriarchs who would say, those radical feminists who can't, ladies who can't, it's
That's
like,
right.
it doesn't work, at least on us.
Nope.
No. Although people do still ask my husband if he's okay.
I mean, it depends on the day,
It does. Are you okay? Every time a book comes out, are you okay?
Oh my God.
I think he's so fragile.
I mean, I don't know. It's very funny.
Actually, that's a good segue into Soraya. You're writing about the limits of the male supremacist imagination and border patrol masculinity and street harassment and ICE raids and linking to this larger petro-masculinity, which is a really excellent term that I hope
Kara Daggett, I mean, she
Yeah.
has an excellent theory. Yeah, I think we can see it in action. I mean, this bombing of Iran, Venezuela, the blockading of Cuba, the energy dominance framing, the militant militarism that we're undergoing. I actually was thinking about all of this, but also in the context of your wonderful, excellent film, because the issue of petro culture, of energy dominance, of the manipulation of all of these resources and gender is such a consistent through line, right? And what was interesting to me when I watched your film was the ways in which the president, Tsui Ing-wen, was regularly treated. She was the original cat lady, right? Like she literally had an ad with a cat where she's hugging the cat, which was very funny in retrospect. But she was just hammered for, among other things, not being able to lead a military because she was a woman, not just a single childless woman, but just a woman who couldn't lead the military. And what's happening in the US right now, of course, is that our military is again being re-heteromasculinized.
Yeah.
And it's also, frankly, being whitened. Like if you look at the policies they're pursuing and the ways in which service people are being disciplined, that's clear. But again, what that does is it redefines citizenship along lines that exclude all women and also largely gay people, but not necessarily straight gay men that we understand are doing just fine at certain levels. But it means they can't be seen as leaders, right? They literally cannot be understood. It doesn't become legible, which is to me that hard limit of the male supremacist imagination. It's establishing a culture in which alternatives are simply not legible. They make no sense to people because they've been so acculturated into denying the possibility, the imagination, the alternative paths that we could take.
Right. I
Absolutely.
also think of Taiwan when you were describing how, by virtue of existing as women, as Black women, as people outside of the male supremacist
Yes,
patriarchal framework in this country, we're automatically seen as dissidents, as provocative,
absolutely.
right? And I think in a global context, as a country, that's how Taiwan is seen.
Yes, I think
And,
that's right. As a feminized state,
right? I mean, it's nuts.
outside of the norms, not
Yep.
practicing the way they're supposed to.
Yep. Let's go to Anna. Your work details how law and order rhetoric is weaponized against specific families and communities. As we've discussed, when authoritarians talk about protecting the family, saving our children, defending our way of life, what should we hear beneath that language, both domestically and in foreign policy debates?
Yeah. I mean, everything that comes out of this original vision of the founding fathers is an extension of that vision. So, all of the laws that came out of that, every system that came out of that, we can see it as replicating American patriarchy. And I should say, to Soraya's point, that yes, I completely agree. We see these systems across the world. And I think one of the reasons I want us to also be intentional on how we're speaking about each of the patriarchies is that they do show up a little differently.
They do.
They're really dependent on who the people were that were writing these laws and the decisions they were making and their own insecurities. And there's a lot of similarities across the different places, and all of us having lived abroad and spent time and working abroad. But there's also these intricacies to them. And so I think one of the ways we can dismantle global patriarchy and authoritarianism, because honestly, those two words are very similar to
They
each other.
are.
They're basically the same thing, is that we can be very clear on kind of mapping the moments in each of these nations and who the leaders were who continued to choose patriarchy as their way of organizing, that always moving out of this was just kind of inevitable and this is where it was going to go anyways. And instead, no, they had other options available to them. And this is what they chose to focus on. And this is how they chose to organize their nation. And so coming back to the United States, every law, even the way our Supreme Court is structured, notion that they get to just keep this position until they die, it's all very archaic. But even our current structure, where we have Supreme Court that's led by Chief Justice John Roberts, who, there have been some moments that are not as horrible as the others, but they are the ones who are designed to protect that original social order. They are the ones that are supposed to keep the Constitution, and most of them identify as originalists. So it's not that this is just my opinion or that I'm making a controversial statement. They identify as protectors of the original intention of the Constitution. So what the founding fathers intended, the majority of our current Supreme Court in 2026 believes that the document is not a living document, that is not supposed to change, but instead that we are supposed to maintain the order that our founding fathers intended. And so what I'm always hoping for is that we stop being shocked by the way in which they're ruling. I feel more surprised when they do something that was good. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, you did it.
How did that happen?
And honestly, it's like more of a mystery. Like, what happened behind closed doors that time? But if we stop being shocked by it and instead are using our energy to shift the system as it currently stands, we have to move out of trying to thrive in this system and
Mhm.
completely recreating it. And one of the places to start would be really the Supreme Court, obviously expanding the courts, et cetera. But so the other part of your question around how law operates is that it will always punish those who are telling us we have other options available to us, those who are trying to shift the system. It's why they are not applied equitably across the board. It's why law can shift depending on your other demographic information. Why, there's no universal notion of how long somebody should be, for example, incarcerated for. It's all going to depend less on whatever the crime was and more on where they fit in terms of maintaining the system or disrupting the system. So the law can just be read as a tool for protecting the system all the way up to those who are the most important lawmakers in our country.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you both have brilliant visions for a better future, and I want to leave people with hope, and I want to get to that. I'm just going to ask one more upsetting question for Soraya, because Soraya, you've shown how technology extends the effective range of harassment and how platforms and AI tools are used to punish women and feminists.
Mhm.
And I wonder how that infrastructure supports authoritarianism, this petro-masculine project.
It's really one of those and both issues to me because it's very clear that technical acceleration has consolidated power in the hands of a very few, and it's also disrupting all of our notions of deliberative processes in the law, of how media should work to support democracy, what the nature of truth is, all of these ideas that are deeply kind of outdated, in fact, given the life that we lead, but specifically also ideas about time. It takes time to deliberate. It takes time to care for people. It takes time to consider as a citizen what you think is right. Like that's gone. That's been flattened. And technology has done that. And we talk a lot about the technology and its weaponization, which we should, but not enough about the socio-technical impacts of that. And one of the impacts, I think, has been really the rightward swing of young men globally. We know that. We know that Gen Z men have been sucked into the maw of a technological machine that is extremely profitable for social media companies and their owners. And that machine is radicalizing men to the right. And a lot of people will say, well, they're just standing in place. They're just moderates. But men are so far to the right of their women peers. Women are at the foreground, like they're fighting the wars for climate, for the environment, for social justice, for racial justice, for peace, for any issue you pick, and you're going to find women, especially young women. And that is what's being called radicalization because the baseline is this deeply conservative, masculine status quo. And so that I think is a given. But at the same time, I feel also very strongly, and I think the three of us are here because of this. I wouldn't have met you if it hadn't been because of the internet. The point, like in my book, the subtitle is how we dismantle male supremacy. And that subtitles are always hard. They're always messy. There's sort of an argument about them. But I wanted to actually have it read as we're doing this. It has been a 70-year fight, and we are doing it every day just by leading our lives and saying what we're saying and doing what we're doing and envisioning alternative futures and trying to change systems. And so the backlash that we're in, which is techno-fueled, in fact, that backlash is because of the success. It's not because of any failure. It's because we've transformed the world. And the way we protest across the board, even with the local variations, the national variations, it's not recognized as protest. It's not recognized as rebellion because it's so intimate, so granular, so day to day in the changes that we've effected. We needed the laws, but even with the laws, if people hadn't adopted the change, then the laws wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
I often think actually about my grandmother and how I wish that both of you and your work were around when she was alive and how that would have changed how she saw herself and her life and her work. It is good to think about the progress we are making
Mhm.
every day. And I'm going to reframe a question that was initially, and I'll ask Anna first, but about the right kind of woman who is rewarded for upholding the system. So, Ghislaine Maxwell or Christine Nome, who was just outed or, gotten rid of.
Pam
Marjorie
Bondi.
Green. Exactly. How do we reach women? How do we speak to women who think it's their duty to uphold the patriarchal system that is hurting all of us, including them and their men?
So much to say about every single one of these questions. My brain is like, okay, focus on where you're going to start. I think if we go back to this notion that some women were included in the recognition, right, of what the founding fathers envisioned because of their ability to reproduce the power of men. And this notion that everybody else is told that you're not really included in this system, but maybe someday you could be if you assimilate to the two recognized groups, or if you protect the system, you may see some rewards. And so long as you see some exceptions throughout American history, it's enough to maintain everybody else's loyalty to the system and their sense of individuality because they think I someday could potentially ascend this ladder. I someday could be rewarded by it. So long as I play my role, so long as I protect it, so long as I do my part, maybe someday I will also be recognized as a human being in the United States. So that's the trick of American patriarchy and how you get so many people who are being hurt by it. Not only women, people of color. I mean, we've seen
Mhm.
so many
Well, the
examples.
last election.
Exactly, right? Who would say, I just was doing my part because I want to be rewarded by this. And so when we then look very closely at the group that is closest in terms of association to the group that is holding all of the power, it actually isn't all that shocking, right? That they continue to protect that social order that, what is it like, what was it, 55% of white women who
Mhm.
voted for him the second time? For me, as much as that's disappointing and it's sad, it's not surprising if we understand what they have been promised and what they have been told is their role to play. And it is consistent throughout American history that they play that role, that they are the co-architects of this system, that they believe that, through especially their role as mothers, this is also, it's always very connected
Mhm.
actually to their role of protecting the family, as Soraya was talking about, and the virtues of the family. They see it as connecting directly to making sure that this system that they are aware they hold a little bit more power in than other groups is protected and that it survives. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of times we approach it from this sense of mystery, like, how
Mm.
are they being fooled? Like, how is this happening? And I don't think many of them are being fooled, to be honest. I think they're fully aware that in their minds, they actually are still voting in their interest. They are still acting in their interest. So those of us who see it on this side of we're trying to expand the democracy to include everybody else, we're looking at them saying, why are you voting against your interests? Like, why are you voting against reproductive rights? Why are you voting against, freedom generally? And actually, many of them are saying, I am. I'm
I
protecting my
know what I'm doing.
I
Yeah.
know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting my comfort. I'm
Yeah.
protecting what serves me. And so that's a majority of them. And to them, what we would say is a very different conversation around them understanding that this is impacting them as well, that in fact, we are all connected to each other. So our pain will impact them, right? You have to get them with the data and the research. But then there's a group of them who maybe, let's say, don't fully understand how they are being hurt by it and how they are being fooled by this system.
Mhm.
And that's a very different conversation where we can say, actually, your power is something that they fear. And so they've sold it to you as if you are the one who is just doing what you're supposed to do, right? In like reproducing this power. But instead, can we flip it and say, realize this? They're aware of how powerful you are. It's why they're controlling it. So what are you going to do differently with your power? Because you actually are capable of much more than what they've promised you, right? All of us are more capable of it. So I think it depends on sort of what mentality they're coming from, but we have to consider the possibility that many of them are very aware of what they're protecting and they're happy to do so.
Yeah. And also, I think, in any given population, anywhere between 28 and 38% of the people are authoritarian minded. And sometimes that takes that's expressed through white supremacy or xenophobia or misogyny. It doesn't, these are just kind of dimensions of the othering and then the oppression. And I think part of the problem I have sometimes with this question of why would women vote against their own interests is that underlying it to me is some form of essentialism that says they're born knowing they should know better, which ultimately is the argument of the people we're confronting, right? It gives that argument strength. I actually think, there are lots of white women with social dominance orientations. That's their orientation. And however they get that, whether it's whiteness in trade for what they lose in status as a woman or not, they're going to do it. Maybe it's straightness, maybe who knows what it is, but they're going to try and find the way. I would rather focus, frankly, on the untapped potential of the men who aren't authoritarian minded.
Right.
You have more success talking to people because, in fact, the people that we're talking about reaching, I think to your point, data is not. I spent my entire career with data trying to prove things until I realized, okay, that's a waste of time for this certain category. If you segment the people we want to talk to, this category of people, data is a waste of your time because it's all identity protective cognition. And so put that aside. That's not efficient right now. Who actually does it make sense for? And I think that's a different audience.
Yeah.
There's no, like for me personally, as a writer and an activist, that's a waste of my time at this stage, and I think that we just need to be able to segment that way and say, who is it that we're talking to about what, when, and where?
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay. So we're speaking to the non-authoritarian minded, not that 20%, but the majority, whatever their gender and
Yes,
orientation.
absolutely.
Yeah. And Soraya, the title of your book, All We Want Is Everything, really comes across in the last chapter of your book when you're describing what that is. And maybe we can share it in a way, as you do in your book, that is enticing, that it's a win-win, that if you can embrace the connection between all of us and reject the male supremacist, patriarchal, abusive, cruel model of hierarchy and control and dominance
And violence.
exploitation, everyone can be happier. But tell us some steps to go about doing that, or what can we
this is the thing. I think we are doing it. And sometimes it's really hard to see, especially in the environment we're operating in now. I think it's very clear that this reimposition of these structures, this power, this violence, this ethos, all this culture, I don't believe that we're in the last throes of patriarchy. I think we're having this terrible spasm, vengeful entitlement, and it will result, frankly, this is not upbeat, in the deaths of many people and in the harms to many people. But at the same time, I do believe, to go back to the point about technology, that we're not going to go back. The technology itself, for example, has undone the technology of nation statehood. It's undoing it as we speak. There's a different culture. There's a different way of learning. There's a different way of understanding the world. And we can see that. We can see communities all over the world who are able to communicate, who share these values. So even if you're in a local place where you feel isolated with your imagination for the future, you can now find people who share that and who have solidarity with you. And I don't think we should underestimate the power of that, because as we know, it really does take small groups of people to make this kind of change. And now we have many more. We have, small world networks where we feel the pull of the big world network, but we have so many small world networks that are very effectively working together. And I think that's a really remarkable thing that we should pay more attention to positively.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. And Anna, can you close us out maybe with some of your inspiring way of looking at and thinking about the world that you deliver to us in beautiful 5-minute doses through your new podcast, Revolution Resolution, which is so inspiring. And I have to actually, I do wonder for both of you, do you feel like we need to create new, I mean, these are grassroots networks of solidarity that can be cross border, you're describing both of you, but do we need new institutions and constitution and all of it? Both of you are experts in this. And I'm just wondering, in your wildest imagination, are we needing to work better with what we have and strengthen the democracy we have? Or is it going to require something new? That's just an additional.
Just a small little question.
Just a tiny one to wrap up with. Yeah.
If that one's too big, I'm open to.
No. I'm going to try. I'm going to definitely try it. I completely agree with Soraya in terms of the notion of we're already doing it, right? I think that that's really important for people to remember.
Mhm.
It's not that we're going to be like starting from scratch
Right.
today. Like you hear the podcast and you're like, now I know how to do it. It's actually really honoring what's already been done.
Mhm.
And so I want to talk a little bit about the women in my first book, the mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. Alberta King, Bertus Baldwin, Louise Little are their names, and they were all born in the early 1900s. So they are born at a time where Jim Crow is the law of the land, where lynchings are commonplace in this nation, where then they see 2 world wars. They experience their brothers or dads or, loved ones drafted to fight for a nation that doesn't even see them as fully human here. And they return to worse treatment. They have their children during the Great Depression. They participate in their own civil rights movement in their own ways. And then their sons are inspired to follow in their footsteps and lead a civil rights movement alongside so many other leaders. At the same time, 2 of their sons are murdered in the name of this civil rights movement. Alberta King finds out that her son was killed by listening to the radio. Then they all outlive their sons, and yet at the same time, they live long enough, 2 of them, to see some of the first episodes of the Oprah Winfrey Show, right? Or not to see President Obama become president, but it overlaps with his first election. On one hand, Bertus Baldwin her life overlaps with Harriet Tubman. And on the other end, her life overlaps with me. So when we talk about the work has been done, we are part of a legacy of continuing the work. And we have to be really incredibly proud of that, because the story, and when a lot of my work focuses in on the United States, but really this is a global story as well. We can still be very proud, even if we are clear on what is unacceptable and what has happened in the past. But if we're looking specifically at the United States, the story of the United States is not only of violence, of authoritarianism. It's not only their story. It's also our story of making this country a better place, of making it so that we are moving closer to the ideal of democracy. We have not yet accomplished it. We have not ever experienced it, but we are a part of potentially someday getting there and creating it. And so all of those strategies that have been used in order to get us this far can make us incredibly proud and inspired to maintain that energy and to build on what we know is possible. Patriarchy and authoritarianism were not the beginning. We can't allow them to take control of that narrative that we're always just trying to respond to them. We're actually trying to reclaim what so many of our people knew, right? Our indigenous practices around inclusivity, around leadership not being tied to gender or the color of your skin. And so when we see it more in this kind of world history view, we are a part of the conversation that has been continuous. And so we can really carry that pride and also the responsibility of the knowledge of what's come before. And the way I envision it is, I would at least want to start with thinking of, okay, this notion of democracy where power is vested in all the people. Let's see that. Like, is it possible maybe in the United States that we could have mandatory voting where I actually get to hear what every single person in the United States believes should happen? And so one of the things from having lived in so many different places is none of these things seem impossible to me.
Right.
Because they've happened in other places, right?
Exactly.
Mandatory voting exists.
Yeah.
in other places. Things like childcare for all and universal healthcare, like all these things, and getting rid of guns. Like the Second Amendment it's got to go. And so for those of us who have experienced other places, right, where you have law enforcement that they don't carry guns. They're just walking around.
Feminist foreign policy.
Feminist foreign policy. It's not that these are like wild things that could never be accomplished and we've never seen them before. There's a lot of countries that elect female presidents. Like this is not anything that we have to, a lot of Americans stay in this notion of like, oh, we're never going to get there. What are we supposed to do? This is impossible. And so I remind us all to think about those 3 little girls in the early 1900s and what people probably told them was impossible.
Right.
We can do it. And in fact, we have to.
Yes.
That was so beautiful. Soraya, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I can't. That was really wonderful, and I wholeheartedly agree.
All right.
Thank you.
Me too. Me too. That was beautiful.
Thank you.